Hey everyone. My guest today is a distinguished lecturer. He's an award-winning reporter for the New York Times. He led the Times Metro team that won a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of the 1993 truck bombing of the World Trade Center. As a best-selling author, his latest book, The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack is available now. And in 2017, he, along with Leslie Kean, broke that story that we all know about the Pentagon's secret UFO program. Of course, I'm talking about the legendary Ralph Blumenthal, right here today on Eric Mintel Investigates The Interviews. My name is Eric Mintel. By night, I'm a professional jazz musician. But by even later at night, I investigate the paranormal. I, along with my team at Eric Mintel Investigates, travel the country, investigating all things paranormal. This is Eric Mintel Investigates. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, Ralph Blumenthal. Ralph, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Eric, thank you. Great to be with you.
And you're in New York City, correct?
Right in the middle, Manhattan on the East River.
And you've been there most of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I was a New York Times correspondent in Texas for a while. Early in my career, I was overseas in Vietnam and West Germany, moved around, but the last number of years based in New York.
Well, I mean, you have had, you're legendary in journalism. You have covered so many incredible stories. Right out of the gate, what I always like to ask my guests, what was the catalyst? What was the fire in the belly that wanted you to pursue a career in journalism? Do you remember that moment?
You know, it's strange. I started off, I entered college, I wanted to be an artist. I studied painting and sculpture in high school. And one day I walked into the City College newspaper office, the school paper, and that was it for me. I was hooked. I mean, the guys who were running the paper were very worldly. They were profane. They were tough, and women too, boys and girls. I mean, it was just a world that was waiting for me to discover it. And the idea that you could, tell people things first, that you would be the one bringing news to them, and you could find out about everything first, and you would be looked up to as somebody who knows things other people don't know. And it was also a great way to meet girls. But, just to finish your question, the story is that after I graduated from City College, I got into the Columbia University School of Journalism, which was a great break because it was the premier journalism school. And then I got a job at the New York Times, starting off as a copy boy. I mean, the lowest rung on the ladder. But I was able to write stories on my own and hand them in, and the Times printed them, and I got to see, the process firsthand, and got to sit at the feet of the greatest journalists of our time. They were at the Times. So that really hooked me, and I got put on the reporting staff pretty quickly, and that was the beginning of my career.
And what year was that now?
1964. And it was a very different America, as you can imagine. I mean, it was the civil rights ferment, and it was and obviously pre-computer. We did everything on typewriters, tobacco smoke in the newsroom. People had bottles in their desk. It was
well, that was the other thing too. Over the years, I'm sure you've seen like the whole industry change over the years, and the clanking of the typewriters now goes to the computer. Now it's not even that anymore. The noise of the newsroom is not even there anymore.
Right. Well, it's true. It's a different era completely. Some things have changed, some haven't. What changed, obviously, is the mechanics of it. And plus, we had deadlines. And once you met your deadline, the paper came out, that was it till the next day. So you had a little breathing room. Now, the industry is operating under 24-hour deadlines, and there's no downtime. And as soon as you file your story, you're on social media, you're updating it, on Facebook, on Telegram, TikTok, every possible means to keep up with the news. It doesn't stop. So it's much harder today to be a reporter than it was in my day. I'll say that.
Specializing in preventing environmental corrosion of grills, cable rails, outdoor showers, and more, Obsidian Blue Wave polymers have been an environmental dream for over 10 years. From the Jersey Shore to St. Martin, Obsidian Blue Wave is the perfect choice for homeowners, contractors, or hardscape companies. Call Obsidian Blue Wave today and protect your investment by getting sealed by the Shield.
I mean, when you and Leslie Kean broke the story about the Pentagon's secret UFO program. I mean, that was like very time sensitive too, because wasn't there another newspaper that was going to blow?
Yeah, we were in a rush with Politico, actually. They'd gotten wind of this too. And I mean, we were in position long before the story ran. We were yelling at our editors, push the button, because we knew that we were in a hot race to be first. But Helene Cooper was part of that. She was a Pentagon correspondent for the time. So it was the three of us. But I mean, it became a very competitive story. You know, the problem in journalism is as soon as you start to call people for information, it's not exclusive anymore. Everybody's, word starts to circulate. And especially today in the internet era, everybody picks up word pretty quickly what you're doing. So we knew we were in a race to get our story out first, even though I think we were very much ahead in the beginning. So, but I think we did publish first.
Unbelievable. And what do you remember, like the moments leading up to that, and how did that all come about? Like when you first heard this.
Yeah, it's a great story. Leslie came to me, Leslie Kean, who's probably the premier writer on UFOs, going back, years and years. She wrote a book about pilots and generals who have gone on the record with UFO sightings in countries from France to South America, etc. Anyway, so she had gone down to Washington and was at a meeting. She had very good sources, and the meeting involved some intelligence people who tipped her off to the fact that the U.S. did have a UFO program, even though supposedly we were out of the UFO business with the end of Blue Book in the end of 1969. We had a very active UFO program. They were taking videos, which we got some of encounters with Navy planes off San Diego and off the East Coast, Virginia. And so she heard about that and came to me and said, "You still have contacts at the Times. Let's see if we can get a piece in the Times." So I went to the top editor. I didn't tell him much about the story. I just said, "Are you interested in a sensational, groundbreaking story involving national security?" Which it did. And they went for it. And to their credit, they gave it good play on a Sunday on page one, and with videos that we got of some of these encounters. So it did move the needle.
That's amazing. I mean, and now, and that's the other thing, the videos, those have been circulated all over the place. And that was the other thing that really went along with this story, was just not that it was in print, but there was actual visual component to it.
For so many years, the government particularly was putting out the story that these things weren't real.
Right.
That these were hallucinations. This was a cover for some of the secret programs that we did have, and also for all kinds of complicated reasons. They didn't want to panic the population. They didn't want to admit that there were things up there that the government didn't know about, the Pentagon didn't know about, couldn't do anything about. So they put out all kinds of misinformation and disinformation. But I'm very happy to say things have really shifted. The government is encouraging pilots to come forward with stories. They have put out these videos. We got them first, but they've then authenticated them. So there've been some positive changes, not enough, but some.
And I always say that, even like 10 years ago, would we even be talking about this now? It's so commonplace because people are seeing something. I mean,
Well, they've always been seeing them, Eric. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, they've always been seeing, but the government was making fun of them and stigmatizing it, and making people think that they were crazy, or putting out the word that whoever reports a UFO is out of their mind. So that tamped it down, unfortunately.
yeah.
But now at least some of that stigma, not all of it, has been removed.
When you step on the beautiful grounds of New Spirit Old Soul, you get that familiar feeling. That feeling of being home. A husband and wife team bringing a unique architectural salvage to every home or business. The grounds can also be rented for that special occasion or a private event. Goods for the uncommon home. New Spirit Old Soul.
We do. And again, it's like we're gathering the information and trying to figure out what that truth is and what the answer is, and what are these things that people are seeing? I always say maybe there's people that are their antenna is more attuned.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that is the big question, is
Right.
how come some people have these encounters and others don't?
Yeah,
Now, there can be two people and one will see a UFO and somebody else won't, although very often both see it. But with abductions, particularly these very strange experiences that people have had of encountering alien beings, one party might be switched off and the other one will have this experience. And who gets picked, if that's the right word, is a mystery. Nobody knows, why or how this works, and that is a good area to be studied. The brains of people who have had these encounters, how do they differ
yeah.
from the brains of people who haven't? And there's got to be some kind of an antenna thing going on.
There is a like some kind of psychological component to this somehow, and a doctor friend of mine agreed to come on camera to talk about that, to say because what do these people have to gain? There's nothing to gain from it other than wanting to know, what did we see? What did they
Right,
see?
absolutely. I mean, John Mack, the guy I wrote about in my book, it dealt with this issue. He really busted that myth that these people were publicity seekers who want attention. It's quite the opposite. They were terrified to come forward. So it's not like these people, are looking for attention or they want their stories to be told. They do not, and they don't know. They're the least clued in on why they're having these experiences. So,
And that's what I wanted to ask you too. Your new book, it's The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. Now, John Mack, a lot of the UFO people in the UFO community will know he really delved into the alien abduction phenomena, what these people were doing, what they were going through, what the psychological things they were going through. When did you meet John, and how did that whole friendship?
well, I never met him because that's really part of the story, that I was in Texas for the New York Times and I picked up a copy of his second book, Passport to the Cosmos. I didn't know who he was, but I thought a book on UFOs by a Harvard psychiatrist sounds interesting. What's he doing in this crazy field? So I read the book and I thought, gee, that'll make a good story for the Times. And I didn't know that he was already very famous. He'd written a first book. He'd gotten into trouble with Harvard. He had written a Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Lawrence of Arabia. He was very well known. He'd been on Oprah.
We're talking today with Harvard University psychiatrist John Mack, who studied the cases of about 100 people, at least, who claim that they've been abducted by aliens.
But I somehow I'd never heard of him. So I thought I'd give him a call and maybe, set up an interview. Interesting story. And a few days later, I picked up the paper, New York Times, and I saw he'd been run over in London and killed by a drunk driver. It was not it wasn't a hit. It wasn't an assassination. It was just bad timing on his part. He got out of the underground, the subway there, subway late at night, and he was a little disoriented and looked the wrong way, as Americans do in England, and got run down. And they investigated the guy who hit him and all that, and he'd had a little too much to drink. And so it's a whole story. But once that happened, obviously I couldn't interview him anymore, but I reached out to his family. I found his family and I said, look, I'm really fascinated by this story. I'd like to do something. I didn't have a book necessarily in mind yet. I thought maybe an article or something, but eventually they gave me access to his archives, which is really an interesting part of the story because he kept terrific notes. He kept journals. He videotaped everything. He actually even taped his own psychiatric sessions, because as a psychiatrist, you had to be analyzed.
Yeah.
So he had, his own analysis with a guru, an Indian like a psychic. And I got access to those. So I kind of knew what he was saying in his most private moments and his journals. And that's what became the book.
And they may see a typical unidentified flying object, a saucer-shaped or cigar-shaped vehicle on the ground of their home, emanating bright lights, or they may be taken by a small craft up into the sky to a kind of mothership, which they see very clearly. So many of them actually see the UFOs that and the insides are so uniformly described with rounded, curved walls and complicated instrument panels that it's become clear that it's some kind of craft in the sky.
Shanghai jazz has been a staple of gourmet cuisine and incredible live jazz for over 20 years. Owner Tom Donahoe has created an atmosphere where good food and good friends can gather for an unforgettable culinary and musical experience. And don't forget to check out the new Encore Lounge downstairs. Choose from a variety of drinks and wait for the show to begin. Shanghai Jazz, your destination for jazz.
There's a number of cases that jump to the fore. That's one of them. Obviously, Roswell, Betty and Barney Hill in New Hampshire.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Betty's niece. Well, you know Kathleen Martin. She's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And a few weeks ago, I had Peter Robbins on my show too.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Great, awesome guys and girl. And and that's the thing. There's probably a handful of those cases that are really, truly you can't explain, because they are something that these people went through, especially with the Betty and Barney Hill hypnosis sessions that you could.
Right. Yeah. Those are really amazing. And the books have been written about it. And, the so-called skeptics, this is my big beef with them. They're very quick to, come up with an answer to everything and say, well, this is clearly, sleep paralysis, or this is hallucinations, or this is this, or this is that, nightmares. And the more you study this, if you're going to be a skeptic, fine, be a skeptic, be, demand evidence, be hard to convince. But you got to know the material. And if knowing the material means studying cases like the Varinga case in Brazil, where these young girls came upon a creature, still a very mysterious case, Betty Barney Hill, and it was supervised by another psychiatrist, not John Mack, Benjamin Simon, who had wonderful credentials of his own. And it's all on tape, by the way. Anybody, you can go to the University of New Hampshire and dig out those tapes. Kathleen Marsden deposited them at a university, and look for yourself.
That's the thing, leaving us that legacy to as researchers and investigators to go back and look at those cases.
In the heart of Quakertown, you'll find McCool's Red Lion Inn, a beautiful historic restaurant where friends can gather and enjoy award-winning food and drink time and time again. And next door, step inside the beautiful McCool's Arts and Events Center and wait for the show to begin. McCool's Red Lion Inn.
You've got new generations of investigators, new generations of reporters, journalists that are open-minded enough to look at this situation and look at it with new eyes and maybe a different light, and maybe come up with another way of looking at it as well. And Ralph, let me ask you, have you ever had any UFO sightings or any kind of paranormal event ever happen to you?
No, I haven't. Like John Mack, he was dying for something to happen to him. He would have loved to have an experience, because he kept hearing about these amazing experiences from the people he was interviewing. I'm not going to call them patients, because there's nothing wrong with them.
Exactly.
They're just people that he was interested in and he was counseling. So he was dying to have an experience of his own, and he couldn't, because you can't force these things. And one of the mysteries of this whole phenomenon is who gets picked for these things, and who doesn't. And if you're not picked, I don't know who's doing the picking and why, but you can't make yourself be picked. You can't volunteer,
Sure.
And if you are picked, you can't not be picked, because these things seem to run in families. They happen again and again. So it's very mysterious, but I myself have not had any of these experiences, but I'm very attuned to the idea that there are other dimensions. There are other things we don't understand. We're only at the beginning of our understanding of some of these mysteries. We're nowhere really in our understanding of these mysteries, but at least we acknowledge them, or we should acknowledge them as mysteries. And you mentioned ghosts. John Mack found at the end of his life that these things may be related. All these paranormal phenomena, ghosts and crop circles, and survival of consciousness, and alien abduction. It's just a whole area.
Yeah.
Experience we can't explain.
Even going back to Roswell, a good friend of mine, Tom Carey, which I'm sure you're familiar with him. He did a lot of research and interviewed a lot of the witnesses in the original witnesses in the Roswell case. But one of the theories now is and this is kind of a new one for me, is that those were not extraterrestrials. The whole thing was extra temporal or extra dimensional, and they were
Us in the future, coming back.
yeah, exactly.
You know, your guess is as good as mine. I mean,
Down
you know, yeah, there's so many scenarios, but the one thing that I think is interesting is that the Pentagon is now acknowledging that these UFOs are real.
Hop aboard the New Hope Railroad and travel back in time riding through scenic Bucks County. Ride the Halloween Scare Train, the Fall Excursion, the Speakeasy Train, Grapevine Express, or new for 2022, the Santa North Pole Deluxe Train. The New Hope Railroad also offers private charters, weddings, birthday parties, and more. Gift certificates are also available. Your magical journey begins with the New Hope Railroad. Make memories that last a lifetime.
When did you first get bit by the paranormal bug? Did you always have an interest in that?
No, not really. I mean, I was a hard-nosed Times reporter, and I dealt with the very down-to-earth subjects like the mafia and Nazi war criminals and corrupt public officials, and that was my beat for the New York Times. And I mean, I read science fiction as a kid, but so did everybody else in those days. That's what you grew up with, Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov, because going into space was the preoccupation of people back in the 50s. When I was growing up, that was what people read about, and it was romantic and exciting. But I didn't carry that forward really. I sort of grew out of that stage, and I became a reporter and very down to earth subjects and all that. But once I encountered the story of John Mack when I was the Texas correspondent and read his book, I realized, boy, this is an interesting area that I have really no familiarity with, but I want to learn about. And the more I learned about it by reading John Mack's material, the more mysterious it became. And I want to emphasize that fact that this is not a matter of answers to questions. This is a matter of questions. I mean, there is no understanding this subject, but at least we have to acknowledge the mystery of it.
Absolutely. And I always say we always leave each investigation with more questions than we do answers, because
Absolutely.
it's always like it's infinite,
Right.
And it's amazing. And the other one, too, that really delved into a lot of these abductions was Bud Hopkins.
Yeah.
Good
Well, he got John Mack involved. That was the thing I found out. I got to interview Bud. Bud died, unfortunately, of cancer about 20, I'm trying to think, 11 or so, 2012, around then. Still a fairly young man. But he was an artist, Bud Hopkins, again, with no credentials as a UFO investigator to begin with. He just seen a UFO once, and he got interested in the subject, and he made himself an expert. He taught himself hypnosis. He interviewed a lot of experiences, and he collected their stories. And through a series of circumstances I mentioned in my book, John Mack met him. He didn't want to meet him. At first he said, this guy's got to be crazy, if he's talking about, aliens or so, that can't be real. But eventually, as these funny things happen, he felt himself pushed sort of by an invisible force to make contact with Hopkins, which he did. And Hopkins showed him the material, and Mack, being a courageous type, other people would have walked away and said, this is not going to be good for my career. I'm at Harvard. They're going to laugh at me. But he said he was confident enough and and courageous enough to say, I am going to look into this. And the more he looked into it, the more he was puzzled, but the more he thought, well, these people have real stories. They're not making it up, and they're not hallucinating. They had some kind of experience we can't explain. But he got that from Bud.
In the heart of Doylestown, you'll find Le Macaron, owned by a local husband and wife team specializing in authentic French pastries, European-inspired coffees by Lavazza, fine chocolates, and more. Le Macaron also offers macaron favors for bridal and baby showers, weddings, as well as corporate gifts. Le Macaron, your go-to destination for an authentic French experience. In the heart of beautiful Bucks County, you'll find Peddler's Village, a village of shopping and dining, a village of family fun, a village of elegance. Visit Peddler's Village today and make memories that last forever. Looking for a vacation home? Look no further. Will Nicholson of Tomlinson Sotheby's has just what you're looking for. World-class entertainment at Schweitzer Mountain or water sports at Lake Pend Oreille, Idaho has it all. Fresh powder skiing, live music, multiple restaurants, and downhill biking in the summer. And, if you're lucky enough, you might spot Bigfoot. He loves it here. Give Will a call today.
All of this is just, and it all ties in. That's what I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about the paranormal genre and the UFO phenomena is all of the puzzle pieces that seem to want to be put together.
You know, people say, well, how come this is only in America? Well, it's not only in America. It's all over South America. It's in Asia, Australia. So it's truly international. That's part of the mystery.
What do you think people are seeing? I mean, what's your gut reaction? Are they actually seeing a structured craft, or are they seeing something that could be other dimensional? What's your...
Oh, I mean, from their own descriptions, it seemed very physical. I mean, they described it in great detail. Benny and Barney Hill did. Yep. This was a real craft. It had some weird aspects to it because they would suddenly find themselves in the craft. They couldn't describe exactly how they entered, but they would get beamed through walls and solid, through windows, but they would suddenly be in this craft, and they described it. And many of the descriptions were similar, which is another thing that convinced John Mack that this was some kind of a real phenomenon, because so many of the descriptions were similar. The interior of the craft, it smelled damp. There was no sign of, kitchens, no bathrooms, the rounded corners, vague light emanating, sort of permeating everything. So all the descriptions seemed to track. So it did seem to be physical. So you're asking me my guess. Well, it is something that has at least some kind of physical component. But it doesn't observe all the normal laws of physicality, because they come and go without people really, seeing how they materialize. They just suddenly are there and then they disappear.
Exactly. I interviewed Calvin Parker from the Pascagoula incident.
Yeah.
I mean, another guy, down to earth, great guy. Is so, and to this day, I mean, that happened in 1973. And to this day still is trying to wrap his head around what happened. So this is not only a phenomena that happened in one point in time. For these people, it's almost like yesterday. Well, we're going to tell everybody where they could find your book, which obviously it's available on Amazon and all the usual sites, but we'll put some information on there as where they can find your book.
And my new book, Eric, I wanted to show you this. This is a book that my wife and I have just done. It's coming out April 15th. It's called UFOs, OHS. It's a children's book, all factual. There's no fantasy. It's not, a story. It's real. It's a real primer, really, for young people on what this phenomenon is and what we don't know about it, which is almost everything. It's beautifully illustrated by an artist we know. So that's coming out April 15th, and we have high hopes for that. I think it's good for kids to understand that there's something out there that we don't understand.
What's next on the agenda for you? Do you have any speaking engagements coming up?
I do a lot of speaking. This is not related to UFOs at all, but 2 nights ago, I ran a program at Hunter College, Roosevelt House, in the house where Franklin Delano Roosevelt lived with his wife Eleanor before they went to Washington, and after he was president, they came back to this house on 65th Street, Manhattan. So that's been taken over by Hunter College as Roosevelt House, and they run programs there. So I moderated a program on prohibition and repeal. Prohibition was repealed 90 years ago this year. So we had a lot of time, fun talking about prohibition and all the crazy things that happened and how it was repealed. So I do public programs. I'm at Baruch. I work in the library. We have a lot of archives there. So I don't just do UFO stuff, but I'm interested in history and run these public programs.
Well, you're telling some great stories. Whenever I have wonderful guests on, my mind is always blown, and I've got a million more questions to ask, but we'll definitely have to do this again. Ralph, thank you so much again. Have a great, great day, and be safe, okay, buddy?
Thank you, Eric. A real pleasure.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.